Thanks for coming, everyone. I've got three issues to touch on today. Firstly, as you know, the Prime Minister and I last week announced that the government, through Export Finance Australia, had reached a deal with Viva and Ampol to enable them to go and get Australian cargoes, or to get cargoes on the international market for Australians. I'm pleased today to announce that deals have been struck with two more companies. IOR and Park Fuels have now finalised their agreements with Export Finance Australia, and they are now equally able to go out and secure those cargoes that are available around the world for Australians, with support from the government to manage their risks and make commercial decisions that would otherwise not be commercial for them. That's particularly good because IOR and Park are both smaller players, but players focus very much on the regions, on Australia's rural and regional areas and fuel distribution to where it's most needed. So now they'll be able to go and get those cargoes and deliver it straight to the regions of Australia, which is a good thing. Secondly, I just wanted to update you on the service station numbers, as I do very regularly, so that Australians are aware of how many service stations are lacking fuel. In New South Wales today we have 84 without diesel, which is down 25 on my last update, which is 3.5% of New South Wales service stations, 17 without any fuel at all. Victoria 18 without diesel, which is down 16 on my last update, that's 1.1%. Service stations in Victoria, 11 with no unleaded petrol. Queensland 33 with no diesel and 20 without regular unleaded. South Australia 3 with no diesel, which is down 1 on my last update. 15 with no unleaded, which is down 2. Western Australia 8 without diesel and 22 without unleaded fuel. Tasmania 7 without diesel and 5 without unleaded fuel. Northern Territory 3 without diesel, 1 without unleaded fuel, and the ACT no service stations without diesel and 1 without unleaded. So that's a total of 156 service stations across Australia without diesel. That's 2% of the service stations. As I've said many times, I want to thank everyone who's worked so hard to get those numbers down, the truck drivers, the refinery workers, right up and down the supply chain, dealing with very high demand, particularly in regional Australia, and making sure that those service stations that have fuel, have diesel in particular, is now around 98%. The third matter I just wanted to update you on is something quite separate. Today the government, through the Clean Energy Regulator, has released the latest data on emissions in our big industrial facilities, the safeguard facilities that are covered by the safeguard mechanism, and I'm very pleased with the results. This is a policy reform that was put into place last term to cover those emissions from our very big industrial emitters. I'm pleased to say that emissions on site, this is not counting offsets, but emissions on site are now 5.8 million tonnes lower than they were when our reforms were made 2 years ago. That's the equivalent of taking 2 million cars off the road, or around 60% of domestic aviation emissions. This is good policy working well, providing that investment certainty for industry to make the investments they need to make sure that their operations are viable on an ongoing basis, but also reducing emissions as they go. I note that really the only climate policy the opposition has so far released is to abolish the safeguard mechanism. Based on my reading of Mr Tann's comments, not only abolish our reforms, but abolish the entire mechanism which was introduced by Greg Hunt under Tony Abbott, which just shows how far the Liberal Party has fallen when it comes to climate policy, that they're now abolishing policies that Tony Abbott put into place. And policies that are working, that industry has welcomed very solidly, and that are seeing emissions come down, which I think is a good thing. The opposition thinks it's a bad thing, but I think most Australians think is a good thing as well. So that's good progress. A lot more work to do, and of course we'll conduct the safeguard review later this year, as I previously said, but good and encouraging signs. And I know that some people focus on the offsets that are allowable under the safeguard mechanism, but what I'm talking about here is on-site direct emissions from the facility. So we're not talking about offsets, we're talking about firms making the investments to reduce emissions on site, which is a very good thing. And of course the Prime Minister's doing great work, I'll just finish on this point, in Malaysia and Brunei, building on his very successful visit to Singapore. I know he'll be saying more to you later today, but this is vital work that the Prime Minister's undertaking to ensure that our chances of securing oil, petrol and diesel in the Southeast Asian market are heightened, and as good as it possibly could be, as the international supply chain continues to be under pressure from the closure of the Straits of Hormuz, and that we'll continue to work and leave nothing on the field to ensure that Australia and Australians are best placed in a very competitive environment to get that fuel if and when the supply chain becomes even more constrained than it is now. Happy to take questions. Lockie, yep.
Former US President Joe Biden's Special Coordinator for Energy Security, Amos Hochstein, said renewable energy will not have any impact on solving the oil crisis. I'll just read you his quote. Renewables don't compete with oil. They don't provide solutions to aviation. We rely on more shipping that doesn't run on renewables. Yes, we should invest more in renewables, but that won't solve this crisis anytime soon. Do you reject what he said, or what's your...
Well, I have a different perspective. I see the electrification and renewables take up as being an important part of the mix, not only for emissions purposes and affordability purposes, but reliability purposes. Not the only answer, but an important part of a well-calibrated mix. So if you look at electric vehicles, for example, in Australia, it's not for everyone right now, but every electric vehicle on the road is less petrol being consumed and more petrol available for those for whom EVs aren't a viable option right now. So if you look at the EVs, which is relatively modest at the moment, high take-up, but relatively modest percentage of the fleet, that's already avoiding 15 million litres of petrol and diesel consumption. That's good because that 15 million litres is available for farmers and for people in the bush for whom they haven't, they don't regard EVs as a viable option for them right now. Plus, as I've said, moving to a more renewable mix is also good for reliability and sovereignty when you think about electricity, for example. So one of the reasons we are better placed in this international energy crisis than we were even in 2022 for the last one was that we are using a lot less gas. 1.5 terawatt hours last summer compared to 2.7 terawatt hours in the summer of 2022. That means that if the gas price goes up, we are less vulnerable to that. Still have impact, but less vulnerable than we were because we're using less gas. And one of the big reasons we're using less gas is we're using more batteries to get us through the night. So I think renewables are part of a common sense, careful, calibrated approach to a more reliable energy system. I'll give you one more before I go to somebody else. I can feel that you've just got one more in you.
On gas, though, Anthony Albanese said we do need new gas fields to come online. Do you support an expansion of the gas sector?
Yeah, look, I've made this point many, many times. We need gas to support renewables. We need gas for heavy industry, for which green hydrogen is not yet, in many instances, a viable option. And we need gas for home heating for those 5 million Australians who use gas to heat their homes. The Bass Strait is rapidly depleting. I don't think that's received as much attention in the public debate as maybe it is. The Bass Strait is rapidly depleting, so to keep that gas supply up, we've always said we would need new sources. So the Prime Minister's, of course, 100% right. I'll go here.
Minister, Western Australia announced yesterday it will stockpile 4 million litres of diesel for its own consumption, and New South Wales has also said it would consider adopting similar measures. Are we at risk of giving rise to a perverse situation where states might compete with the Commonwealth for fuel?
No, because we're not directly procuring. We're helping companies procure. I welcome Western Australia's moves. I think this is good policy by them. They've sought and received assurances that the diesel that they've procured is additional to Australia, so it's not taking diesel off another state. So that's a good thing. They're working hard to bring more diesel into Australia. I find their approach complementary to our approach, not in any way in conflict with it.
Just on that.
Let's go here first and then I'll go.
Just on that point, I mean, do you, I think on Monday you said that you supported that move by WA. Do you actually think that all states, though, should be proactively looking at doing this? I
think it's a matter for state by state. I support Western Australia doing it. Whether other states should do it is entirely a matter for those states to weigh up their particular needs at a particular time. Western Australia's got, obvious issues in the Pilbara and with their heavy industry. I think it's a matter for each state to assess.
And I just want to say, what do you make of the figures from the National Road Transport Association, which suggests that up to 3/4 of trucking companies will be closed in the next 6 months? I mean, is that a national emergency, and should you be providing up some kind of...
Well, we've made very clear, we understand, that's not a supply issue, that's a price issue. Diesel's very expensive, and the cost of diesel is going up more than the cost of petrol around the world. That's just the way the market's working at the moment. That's why we took the road user charge to zero, the heavy vehicle road user charge to zero. That's the most direct lever the Commonwealth has. Of course, as the PM, the Treasurer, has said, we'll always look at what other options are required going forward. Yes, we've always said this is going to put a lot of pressure on various industries. Obviously, heavy vehicles are right up there, and that flows through to the supply chain across so many sectors. That's a result of the diesel price around the world being so high, not a result of particular supply issues to Australia, which we've been working hard to fix.
Minister, what's your position on whether the government should extend the cut to the fuel exercise? Are you worried about the inflationary impact this could have in line with the IMF's warning of a possible recession?
My position is it was 100% the right thing for the government to do, the most direct and immediate support we can give. We've said it'll be 3 months. Obviously, we'll see how we're going in 3 months, but it's a good thing that it will apply for that 3 months.
That's the question. Do you expect that it should be extended?
Well, we're not. We're only. I don't think we're even at a month point yet. We're only at a few weeks. So let's see.
That you're open to
Let's see.
if this continues?
Let's see.
Minister, excuse my French, but has the force majeure been declared on any ships?
That's fine. That's fine, French.
Be it on fuel that have been bound for Australia, and are there any indications that force majeure may be a risk to imports in the future?
The only force majeure has been the 6 forward contracts which I previously announced some weeks ago. There's been no more since then, and they've been fully replaced with other orders and more and more. And that's why we put into place too this EFA mechanism, so that if there are any more, that we have the mechanism to go and get more cargoes to replace them. But at this point, only the 6 and more than replaced.
And any indications that may occur in the future?
No particular indications, but I've always said that the supply chain is very constrained and under a lot of pressure with the closure of Straits of Hormuz. So that's when I talk about ongoing challenges and risks, that's what I'm talking about.
Just on another issue.
This gentleman hasn't had a go yet. I'll come back to you.
Polling published by Capital Brief and Demos AU this morning found that significantly more Australians disagree that the US is a reliable military ally than Australians who agree. Is the social licence for AUKUS being lost in Australia?
I don't generally comment on opinion polls on any matter, and 2, I wouldn't necessarily conflate the 2 issues. Yep.
Yes, so workers at Impex LNG facilities are voting this week on whether to strike, which comes at an especially volatile moment in gas markets, in global gas markets. Is the government in touch with Impex and the union about this, and are there any contingency plans in place for if strikes do go ahead and the ultimate impacts of that on production?
We always prefer these matters to be resolved amicably. Ultimately, there are processes under the industrial relations system for them to be resolved in Minister Ishworth's portfolio through the Commission. Obviously, we'll keep closely monitoring, and I have no further comment to make.
Yeah, separately, Impex did agree earlier this week that it would keep its condensate in Australia.
Yep.
Should every producer that has access to condensate or oil keep it in Australia rather than sending it offshore?
Well, I mean, I think that's good what Impex has done, and that's welcome. We're not talking, huge proportions of the greater demand, but nevertheless, every bit helps, and I welcome that. Obviously, that comes from predominantly offshore, and that can be difficult to get to Australian refineries, but it's horses for courses. It's a good thing that's happened, and if others choose to do it, I'd certainly welcome it. Yeah.
Minister, are you concerned about more airlines potentially cutting back on routes following Qantas's announcement yesterday?
Well, Qantas and Virgin, as I understand it now, and this is again a reflection of cost, not supply. So this is not about a shortage of jet fuel, this is about the cost of jet fuel, which is way up. I just want to make that point because some people might understandably conflate the 2 issues. The cost of jet fuel is way up around the world, just as the cost of diesel is way up, and that's impacting on airline operations around the world. And so but that's not an Australian-only issue, obviously. It's a matter for the airlines to manage in terms of their own commercial decisions. And what they're doing is trying to manage those very high costs in a way which gives as much notice to Australians as possible about what routes will be affected. And so, ultimately, you asked if I expect more. Well, that's a matter for the airlines. Ultimately, I'm not really in a position to predict what other airlines might do.
Just a quick update on jet fuel supplies in Australia.
Same as I updated on Saturday. We have 30 days worth of jet fuel in Australia under the minimum stock obligation.
And just on that, is Australia weighing any financial assistance to our national carrier in light of this?
No, I'd refer you to my previous answer. We'll always consider what might need to be done in the future, but at the moment we are not contemplating any particular action.
Farmers are saying at the moment they're having to shoulder the increased fuel costs, both in their inputs and also freight to retailers, and many of them saying they're having to go under because, like other businesses, they can't set the prices of their goods. Should Coles and Woolworths be dipping into some of their profits and helping shoulder some of this cost without even passing it on to customers?
Oh, look, I think sensible people would expect and hope that Coles and Woolworths are working very cooperatively with their suppliers and their best interests of their very long-term suppliers and in the best interests of all Australians. And I think Australians would trust and expect that to be the case.
Just to confirm, on the previous answer to my question, are you suggesting that the differences with the US over Australia's participation in the Iran war and the war's unpopularity in Australia has no bearing on...
I'm saying they're separate issues. We will make our foreign policy and defence decisions always exclusively based on Australia's best interests and Australia's values, not the best interests of any other nation or values of any other nation, including the United States. We'll make our decisions based on our own values and our own best interests.
Since the Singapore deal was finalised, have any extra fuel import shipments been secured?
Well, the Singapore deal was ensuring reliability of supply, and that supply continues from Singapore. So that Singapore deal was not about extra shipments. It was about securing ongoing commitment from Singapore to remain a reliable energy supplier. So I think they're separate issues.
Minister, just with Western Australia's stockpile announcement, does that risk undermining the sort of national approach that your government's favoured so far?
No, I don't think so. The Western Australian government gave me a heads up that it was coming. I appreciated that. I think it's complementary to federal efforts, not contradictory, so therefore I don't see it in any way. States are doing different things. Many states have stepped up in various ways, suitable for their own state circumstances. They won't all be the same. That's how federation works. I think that's perfectly manageable and indeed welcome that states are taking those sorts of actions.
Will the federal budget have any money to potentially expand the strategic reserves?
It's not budget day, mate. Yep.
Has the ACCC reported to you any action against profiteering petrol stations? And if so, can you give us an update?
Well, ACCC makes its own updates. It's not in my portfolio. ACCC answers to the Treasurer, not to me, and they make their own independent updates.
You're not aware of anything like that?
They'll make their own independent updates.
Minister,
Yeah, just to hear first and then
Just speaking about the EFA, have Ampol or Viva bought any fuel under this agreement?
Well advanced discussions. I'll give further updates.
Okay, so if not, how soon will these discussions be finalised?
Well advanced, and I'm here before you very regularly at these press conferences. I always give full updates, including today's progress on IOR and Park, which as I said is very welcome because they're smaller players focused on the regions. There are other discussions as well with other companies that are very well advanced, and that's a good thing.
State and the federal government is clearly pushing people to consider electric vehicles rather than regular cars. Do you have any regrets that Australia is not a bigger player in the manufacturing space here, given the dominance of the US and China? In this context of talking about us being more self-sufficient.
Yeah. Well, of course, car manufacturing finished in Australia under the Abbott government, and it's very hard to bring back. Tony Abbott and Joe Hockey waved it away, and once you've lost an industry, it's very hard to bring one back. We are component manufacturers in various points, including my own electric in Western Sydney. That's a very good thing. We want to build sovereign capability through the Future Made in Australia agenda. We made great progress. Just at the end of last year, I was turning the first sod at the solar foundry in Newcastle, which will make a lot of solar panels in Australia, as well as our support for Tindo and other players to expand their production of solar panels. That's not about EVs, but it's about sovereign capability.
Is there more that can be done in the EV space?
Well, we'll always look at options, but I'm not here to pretend to you that you can rebuild a car manufacturing industry. We had one, and Australia was deindustrialising under Tony Abbott, and I chose not to have one anymore.
What's your response to Angus Taylor today, accusing the government of being dishonest with the closure of the refineries, noting that it began I guess in 2011. They're saying that happened under Albanese when he was Transport Minister, and they're saying that's being dishonest. What's your response to that?
Well, here's the fact. Here's the fact for Mr. Taylor. There were 6 refineries in 2013 when we lost office, and 2 when we came back to office in 2022, and he was Energy Minister for a big chunk of that. And I heard him say the other day, only one closed when he was Minister Kwinana. Well, he actually issued statements when Altona closed while he was Energy Minister saying, don't worry, there's no impact on fuel supply. Well, there is an impact on fuel supply when the Australian refinery closes. They're the facts. 4 closed in the Liberal period in office. That's just a fact, and Angus Taylor can, duck and weave those facts all he likes. That's the situation. The maths is pretty simple. 6 when we lost office, 2 when we came back.
Have any deals to underwrite oil or fuel imports been executed with export finance?
I think I just answered that question. Yeah.
Minister, just as industry commits more new capital investment to comply with the safeguard mechanism, how important do you think it is that a carbon border tax be brought in to ensure these trade-exposed industries remain competitive?
Well, I mean, I've received the YOTSO review, which is public. We've said we'll consider that in terms of the safeguard review. It would only, even the YOTSO review only applies to a very small number of facilities, but we haven't considered that yet and won't consider it until we undertake that process. Probably the last one, yep.
Minister, how many scheduled shipments of fuel have been disrupted, if any?
The 6 that I previously announced that have been more than replaced. We have 57 ships. My last update was 57 ships on their way to Australia. Some have landed since then, and some have, left their port. But I, update that weekly, and the last update was 57 on their way to Australia, with 4.1 million litres locked in to be delivered over the next 4 weeks. All right? Did I say 4.1 billion litres? Did I say that right? Yeah, 4.1 billion litres to be locked in over the next. He's locked in for delivery over the next 4 weeks. Thanks, guys. Cheers.